I'm Cheryl Chumley. This is Bold and Blunt, giving you a Christian conservative view of news, politics, culture, and events. Gol Kalev, thank you so much for coming back. Welcome.
Great to be here. Good to see you, Cheryl.
Happy Hanukkah. I know Israel is in the midst of kicking off one of their holy holidays. How is the tone over there right now?
Yeah, the tone is that, look, we're optimistic. Sadly, I've been suffering casualties, and this is a tough war like any other war, but the motivation is high. There is no more justified war than this war, a war for our homes, and the country is united. We always have our little internal political debates, but we're all united. We're all in this together. There's a lot of mutual help and assurances, and we're in good shape.
And Hanukkah will go forward just as normal?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not as normal since a lot of the people are in the army, and sadly, a lot of the people in the south have been displaced, and a lot of people in the north has been displaced. But we're still at home in Israel, and we're very fortunate to be here, and we feel very safe here. As a Jew, I'd much rather be in Israel now than on a college campus in the United States or anywhere in Europe.
That's a really good point, and it sort of segues into what I wanted to discuss with you. So the last couple of times you've been on, we've spoken quite a bit about the media and how the media has failed to do due diligence by putting in proper context what's taking place in Israel right now. And I wanted to talk about sort of the reasons why. What is driving that? And not just the media, but the anti-Israel sentiment that courses through the entire United Nations. What drives that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we can get very deep and historical here. We're here because Theodor Herzl, who was the visionary of the Jewish state, the father of Zionism, concluded the European opposition to Judaism is permanent and chronic, and it's not going to go away. It's just going to be funneled to whatever the state of Judaism is. Now, Zionism in Israel is the most relevant aspect of Judaism. So quite naturally, the opposition to Judaism is funneled through Zionism in Israel. Anti-Zionism has replaced traditional anti-Semitism as the currency to the age-old opposition to Judaism. And we're seeing this today in the same way that we've seen in the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, when then the media was against the Jews, and there was all sorts of ideology and philosophical ways of claiming that the Jews do all kind of bad things, that pollute humanity. Now it's a Jewish state and Zionism. So, in a sense also, it sort of feeds itself because, the media, if I were to watch the BBC, I probably wouldn't like the Jews either. I certainly would not like Israel. And and you have to ask yourself, if I was subjected to the Nazi propaganda before World War II, or even before that, to the anti-Semitic propaganda at the end of the 19th century, what would my views on the Jews be then? So I talked to a lot of my friends in Europe and those in the United States who are fed by this media. And there is an enormous amount of incitement. It's not just due diligence. It is, I know those journalists who are covering this. I understand there is a narrative here, and that narrative at its core is anti-Zionist and anti-Israeli, and that is considered sort of the right thing to do. There's all kinds of other stuff on the periphery. We spoke a little bit, I think, about the idea of being balanced as a value, which is not applicable when you have an unbalanced situation. But the media and the UN and all those forces are sort of feeding this and into a cycle, into a spiral.
It's funny you mentioned the BBC, because just minutes before we began our chat, I was watching a BBC clip on the latest what's taking place in the war. And they conveniently brought out how the United Nations Secretary General is basically pointing at Israel for a ceasefire, demanding a ceasefire, and talking about the apocalyptic atmosphere that's taking place in Gaza now, and the poor Palestinian people are displaced and sleeping in the street and so forth. But the journalist brought forth no context about why that situation is taking place in the first place, that it was Hamas who attacked. And so I'm just curious, when you see this in Israel, are you guys sort of used to it at this point and you just shrug it off? Or is it something that really, fuels the angst and so forth?
We are definitely used to it since the beginning of Israel, and certainly since the Oslo Accord since in the birth of the conflict industry and the escalation of the anti-Israeli rhetoric in the last 20 years. So we're used to it, but I personally view that as an existential threat to Judaism and to global stability. I think the Hamas attacks is a threat to Israel, but we will survive it. It's a threat. It will kill Jews. It's a threat to individual Jews. It's a war that we can win. But this anti-Israeli, this Israel bashing and anti-Zionist machine, ideological assault of the Jewish nation is much more serious, because you have generations of people around the world, in the West and in the East, being indoctrinated with those slanderous accusations against the Jewish state, as they were in previous episodes, before the Holocaust, before the Inquisition, before the blood libels in the Middle Ages in England. I'm much, we're used to it, but I'm very much worried about it. And to be blunt, the Secretary General of the UN has a lot to do with this. With the situation in Gaza, because his predecessor, let's not forget, there's this form of, I call it the cycle of violence here, where, there's Hamas attacks us, we retaliate, but it's not that our retaliation gives birth necessarily to new terrorists in Gaza. I mean, that's maybe there's an element of that, but the retaliation gives birth to the Israel bashing and anti-Zionist coalition that he is part of it, and the BBC is part of it. And they use that to indoctrinate people around the world and to call Israel to stop. And that allows the Hamas to have more rounds, because a ceasefire, as we spoke last time, means that there's going to be more October 7th. That's what a ceasefire means. Hamas stays, and that's its victory. And that is the Hamas war doctrine. And Hamas attacked Israel, assuming that the de facto unwilling allies in the BBC, in the media, in the UN, will at some point put pressure on Israel, say you're committing crimes against humanity, there's a humanitarian crisis, you got to stop. And then Hamas survives. It just sustain a few tough weeks or months in their tunnels protected by human shields. So the cycle of violence is because they're, those people, including the Secretary General of the UN, play exactly in the Hamas doctrine. And then the BBC can say, well, he's a credible source, he's the head of the UN. And we have to remember, we spoke, I think, a couple of times ago about the 2005 disengagement from Gaza. And Cheryl, I remember back then, my friends, including those working in the UN and in progressive circles in the US, said, just get out of Gaza. Everybody will be with you. And if, God forbid, in the unlikely event that Hamas or anybody attacks you from Gaza, just go at them with full force and you'll have the moral high ground and everybody will be behind you. And what happened? We got out. Hamas took over, attacked us. We retaliate. And our right for self-defense was deemed by the United Nations as a crime against humanity. So the United Nations created this by, instead of saying, no, you're right, Gaza is under occupation by Hamas and Israel has the right to defend itself, they just went to their instinctive knee-jerk reaction, and if the Jewish state is doing something, it must be wrong, and immediately went at the Jewish state, accused us of crime against humanity. So in a sense, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza was caused by the UN and by their obsessive anti-Zionist and anti-Israel stance.
So let me just finish up with this last question, talking about media coverage and so forth of what's taking place. Is there media that is coming out of America that is putting things in proper context, or is it all pretty much the pro-Palestinian viewpoint that you're getting over in Israel?
Well, I think sadly, and I'm saying this, it almost like it bifurcates between the left-wing media is anti-Israel and the right-wing media is pro-Israel, and putting it more in context. And this is sad for us because, how can you be, pro-rape, pro-murder, pro-terrorism, even if you're on the left, but it's part of the social circles and it's part of this ludicrousy that we have in America that the left-wing media subscribes to, but everybody really does. And that ludicrousy is that you have a stance in America of zero tolerance to traditional anti-Semitism, which was the threat to Jews in the 20th century, but ample tolerance to anti-Zionism and Israel bashing, which is the contemporary threat to Judaism today. So that's why, if you say 6 million were not enough, about the Holocaust, then of course you'll get fired and you'll be condemned. But if you say 1400s were not enough, basically telling Hamas should survive and do more, then you're fine. The Secretary General even says that, ceasefire, humanitarian. So we got to end this ludicrousy of the idea that we're going to protect against the threat to the Jews of the previous century. We got to protect against the threat to the survival of Judaism of today, which is anti-Zionism and Israel bashing. And Cheryl, if I may add, anti-Zionism is not just a threat to the survival of Judaism; it's also a threat to global stability and even to America, because we see those pro-Palestinians, quote unquote, pro-Hamas demonstrations around Europe and the United States. What do they say? Globalize the Intifada. Globalize the Intifada. Anti-Zionism is basically a vehicle, a vector, to take this war to the United States, to Europe. And that's why I think a lot of people are looking at us and at our war against Hamas and expecting us to be aggressive and to stop Hamas here in the Middle East so it doesn't trickle into Gaza and the United States.
Gol Kalev, it's always great to chat with you, especially on this holy day for you. Yeah. Happy Hanukkah once again. Stay safe, and I will talk with you soon. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.